Welcome to the Deep Dive. We're your shortcut to getting informed, hopefully with some interesting facts and, keeping it engaging. Today, we're jumping into a real giant. In personal finance, we're looking at key bits from Robert T. Kiyosaki's Rich Dad, Poor Dad,
Mhm.
A Wealth Education. Our goal here isn't just a book report. We want to really sort of unpack Kiyosaki's main ideas, his core lessons, and guide you through his, well, often quite different take on money and wealth. And the whole thing hinges on this really cool premise, the lessons he learned from two very different dads. Okay, so let's set that up. These two figures, they really stand for two totally different ways of thinking about money. First, there's Kiyosaki's actual father, who he calls the poor dad, described as, well-educated, worked for the government. His financial world, it was all about the salary, job security, the traditional route, basically.
And then you've got the rich dad. Now, this wasn't his biological father, but his best friend's dad. An entrepreneur, self-made, wealthy. And he had taught Kiyosaki about how money actually works, or at least his version of it. And right there, that sets up the core conflict, doesn't it? This huge contrast between working for your money versus having your money work for you. It's a really fundamental shift.
Yeah, the distinction, employee of money versus money is your employee,
Mm-hmm.
that's absolutely central. It leads straight into his first big lesson, right? The rich don't work for money. So poor dad says, work hard for that paycheck, climb the ladder. But rich dad's lesson was different. Make the money work for you.
Okay, but how? How do you actually do that?
Exactly. That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? Kiyosaki says you've got to shift your focus. It's not just about earning income from a job. The real advice is build assets. It means creating or buying things that generate wealth for you, things that make money while you sleep, essentially, rather than just swapping your time for cash. It's about building a system. Right. And that connects to something else he really hammers home. Financial education is absolutely crucial. He argues pretty strongly that schools just don't teach you the practical stuff about managing money, let alone growing it. He sees that as a huge gap.
Oh, definitely. He insists that if you want to get ahead financially, you need to actively go out and learn about investing, about basic accounting, how markets tick, even some legal stuff. It's about getting the right tools, so you can actually play the game, not just watch from the sidelines.
And here's a point that, well, it makes you think. Kiyosaki basically says financial smarts beats just working hard without that knowledge. It's not only about effort, it's about being strategic with your money. So what does he actually mean by this financial intelligence? Maybe unpack that a bit. Okay, so Kiyosaki wants us to get really clear on some basic terms, but maybe in a slightly different way than we're used to. First up, assets. For him, an asset isn't just something valuable you own. It's specifically something that puts money into your pocket, like dividend stocks or rental property that brings in rent each month that generates income. Okay, and then the flip side, liabilities. These are things that take money out of your pocket. And this is where it gets a bit controversial sometimes, right? Because he often puts your own home, if you have a mortgage, firmly in the liability column. Because he argues it mainly costs you money, mortgage payments, taxes, upkeep, rather than generating income for you directly.
Right. And then there's cash flow. Super simple concept, really. It's just the direction money is moving. Positive cash flow. That means more money coming in, ideally from your assets, than going out for your expenses and liabilities. That's the goal in his system. Healthy cash flow is key.
And all this leads to the big one, financial independence. Kiyosaki's definition is pretty clear. It's when your assets generate enough income consistently to cover all your living expenses. You're not tied to a job anymore for survival. Your money is doing the heavy lifting.
Yeah, and what's really powerful here isn't just the definitions themselves, it's how he uses them to make you rethink, well, everything about your financial life. Understanding his distinction between assets and liabilities and why positive cash flow is king, that's absolutely fundamental if you want to follow that rich dad path. It's about building a machine that feeds you, not one that drains you.
That mindset is key. And it flows right into his next lesson, lesson 3. Mind your own business. The core idea is, don't just work at your job. Focus on building and managing your own asset column. He mentions things like stocks, bonds, income-generating real estate, even intellectual property. But, for someone working 9 to 5, how does he suggest you actually start doing that, building your own business on the side?
Well, it really pushes this idea of not being solely dependent on that paycheck. He's basically saying you need other income streams. You need to be building things that work for you, even when you're not actively working at them. It's really about fostering an entrepreneurial spirit, even if it starts small, because that's where he sees the path to real freedom.
And thinking about building assets, he brings up key lesson 4, the power of corporations. He talks about how the wealthy often use corporate structures, not just for running a business, but strategically, for things like minimizing taxes and protecting their assets. He's not saying everyone needs to rush out and incorporate tomorrow, I don't think,
No, not necessarily.
but more about understanding how these tools work.
Yeah. Exactly. And what's fascinating there is how he points out the advantages. For example, a corporation can often pay its expenses first and then pay taxes on what's left. For an individual employee, it's usually the other way around. You get taxed first, then spend what's left. It's about understanding there are different sets of rules, and knowing those rules can be beneficial. Rules, Kiyosaki implies, aren't always taught widely.
Okay, this next one, key lesson 5, the rich invent money. That sounds pretty intriguing, maybe even a bit out there. He's obviously not talking about, putting cash in the basement.
Right, right.
So what does he mean? He seems to be talking about seeing opportunities where others don't. It really does make you stop and think.
Yeah, it's less about literal invention and more about financial creativity and spotting value. Think about finding, say, an undervalued property, maybe structuring a deal to buy it with little money down, fixing it up, increasing its value or cash flow. You've essentially created wealth or income from a situation others overlooked or didn't know how to handle. It's about using your financial intelligence, your connections, your negotiation skills to generate opportunities, seeing potential.
And that ability to spot and act on opportunities, that often comes from experience and skills, which ties into key lesson 6. Work to learn, not to earn. This one's about prioritizing jobs or roles based on the skills you can gain, things like sales, marketing, communication, leadership, even if the initial paycheck isn't amazing.
hmm The advice here is really don't just chase the highest salary early on. Sometimes taking a job that pays less but teaches you, say, direct sales or how to manage people, that experience becomes an invaluable asset later. It's like you're investing in yourself and your own human capital, acquiring that financial education through real-world experience. That knowledge can be leveraged for much bigger gains down the line.
Of course, putting all this into practice, well, it isn't always straightforward. There are obstacles, and Kiyosaki addresses this directly in key lesson 7, overcoming obstacles. He lays out 5 main things he sees holding people back financially: fear, cynicism, laziness, bad habits, and arrogance.
And this really gets into the mindset side of things, doesn't it? Because these aren't just about market downturns or bad investments. These are internal. Kiyosaki's point is that your own psychology, your attitudes, your daily routines, they can be just as important, maybe even more important than the specific financial strategies you use, like laziness. He doesn't just mean being physically idle. He often means the mental laziness of not wanting to learn or avoiding difficult financial truths. He argues that's just as damaging. It forces a bit of self-reflection.
So if we pull back and look at the big picture message of Rich Dad, Poor Dad, it seems to be that building wealth, it really starts upstairs in your head. It begins with changing how you think, getting educated about money continuously, and then taking action. He's really urging you to be proactive, focus on building those assets, be mindful of liabilities, and just keep learning.
Absolutely. And he sums it up so well with that quote. The single most powerful asset we all have is our mind. If it is trained well, it can create enormous wealth. It puts the power and the responsibility squarely back on the individual.
So what does all this mean for you, listening right now? I think this deep dive really underscores that huge perspective shift Rich Dad, Poor Dad offers. It's saying, look beyond just the size of your paycheck. Think fundamentally differently about how money works and how you manage yours. It definitely challenges a lot of the conventional advice many of us heard growing up.
And maybe a final thought to leave you with, building on Kiyosaki's ideas. Think about his sharp distinction between assets and liabilities. Is there something in your own life right now that you usually just think of as an expense or maybe even liability? Could shifting your perspective or maybe learning something new about it potentially turn it into a future asset or at least a stepping stone towards greater financial independence? Something to chew on.